horses with less severe gastric ulcers had higher levels of arachidonic acid in their red blood cells or in their cells than those with more severe ulcers. So there was some sort of benefit of arachidonic acid in that situation.
Hello, and welcome to another equine-focused episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, where we explore the science behind how we feed our horses. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Rankovich, and today I'm joined by Dr. Peter Huntington as we discuss the role of N3 and N6 fatty acids, also known as omega fatty acids, in equine nutrition. Dr. Peter Huntington is the Director of Nutrition at Kentucky Equine Research and a leading authority in equine nutrition with over 40 years of experience. He earned his veterinary degree from the University of Melbourne in 1981 and began his career in the equine clinical practice before moving into equine nutrition research with the Department of Agriculture in Victoria. Since 1999, he has led Kentucky Equine Research's Australasian Nutrition Program, consulting widely with horse owners, veterinarians, trainers, and feed manufacturers across both Australia and globally. Dr. Huntington is also an external lecturer and examiner at the University of Melbourne Veterinary Science Program and holds numerous other appointments in the horse industry. Dr. Huntington has held prominent roles, including being a past president and editor of the Australian Equine Veterinary Association, and has also been a trustee of the Australian Horse Industry Council. He has also authored numerous scientific articles, along with the popular book Horse Sense, The Guide to Horse Care in Australia and New Zealand, which he will talk about later on in this episode. Dr. Huntington, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very, very excited to be talking fatty acids with you today. I think it's a fascinating topic and one that I think deserves more attention and understanding in the equine community.
Definitely deserves more understanding, Alex. Anyway, good to be here. So there's a lot of confusion about them, the roles of the various fatty acids and how to what you need to feed the horses to increase levels and what situations you might want to do it in.
I agree. And we'll get into that all today, I hope, and some more. But before we jump in, would you like to share a bit more about yourself and maybe what led you to becoming interested in equine nutrition?
Yeah, I was an equine vet, which was all I ever did. And then it was sort of partly opportunities came along and there seemed to be so much that was unknown about equine nutrition. And so that was one of the things. And ironically, I sort of started out thinking, this would be great, sort of more regular lifestyle, no nights and weekends on duty, etc. But then you get to go away for travel to, and I've worked in a lot of countries, but that's interesting too. So it's, I think, lots unknown, and trying to combine the art of the art of horse feeding and the science of horse nutrition and increased knowledge there. So, when we started this out, there was, going around giving lectures to people with slide projectors with old-fashioned slides. You've probably never seen them, but 35.
I'm old enough that I have seen them, but
35 millimeter slides. And the one time I turned up for some talk an hour or so ago, and I had the slides in the carousel and thought, oops, where's the projector? That was a bit of a glitch. But anyway, now you do them with PowerPoint and data projectors. And so the latest challenge is when you're doing them on sort of TV screens, how do you get the laser pointer to work on
absolutely. New technological issues.
You've got to get that sorted. So, there's been a lot. I think it's a very interesting field. I'm still learning. I've been doing it for a long time and still learning, and I think that's sort of fascinating too.
I agree. I think we're very fortunate as animal scientists and animal nutritionists that we do get to make so much of our day about these animals that we care so deeply about. And I love that you mentioned horse feeding being a science and an art. And that's something that we've talked about before on this podcast. And I think something that Pat Harris had said when she was on too, is that it is kind of both of these things. And I don't think that we think about it that way.
Kemin Nutrisurance is compelled to provide safe and delicious ingredients to improve our pets' food so they can have the best quality of life. Every day, they deliver specialized expertise, innovative products, and unrivaled support through the pet food and rendering value chain. From oxidation control and food safety to palatability and nutrition, all the way through a suite of tailored services that support you from start to finish, we ensure you're getting the most from Kemin ingredients. Kemin is compelled by curiosity to ensure pets around the world are living happy and healthy lives.
So maybe before we get too technical, we should start with what are omega fatty acids and why are they important in the context of equine nutrition?
Omega fatty acids are sort of unsaturated fatty acids with bonds at different places that I guess define them. Define whether they're 3 or 6, where the bonds are, and they are sort of metabolized in the body, go into cell membranes, and the end products of that metabolism have some different roles. And in general terms, the omega-3 side of it leads to anti-inflammatory or inflammation-resolving fatty acids, EPA and DHA, and the omega-6 side leads to more pro-inflammatory, generally speaking, more pro-inflammatory arachidonic acid, which then leads to mediators or pro-inflammatory mediators. So these are fatty acids are part of the fat intake of horses. They're sources of energy. And so I think we can fuse things by looking at yes, we're feeding fat for energy, and it's a great source of fat, but then these sort of biochemical roles of some of the fatty acids in the makeup of that fat will determine outcomes and sort of anti or pro-inflammatory trends, shall we say, in the cell membranes in particular.
That's great. And you've already sort of spoken to omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Would you maybe, I don't know that everyone listening maybe knows about the competition for enzymes between these two families and maybe why sometimes we discuss them in terms of ratio.
Yeah, I mean, the competition for enzymes is the critical one, so that when you've got say an omega-3 fatty acid, the 18 carbon level, alpha linolenic acid, then as that is metabolized, then there's a 6 desaturase enzyme that's metabolizing that to the next one down the chain. But that's also used for metabolizing the omega-6 side, and also converting EPA to DHA further on down the track. So it's got the competition is a key thing. So where you get an overload of omega-6s, the linolenic acid, the 18 carbon, and you might get that from, say, many of the oils that we feed or from grains, then what omega-3s that there are not being metabolized effectively to the long-chain forms, to EPA and DHA. And I think that's a critical step. Now, that's not something we can measure, but we can measure levels of all different fatty acids now. We've just started doing some work with dry blood spot cards that is a collection vehicle, and then you get an accompanying OmegaQuant getting measurements of all fatty acids, and that really gives us a marker of an individual horse, but you then trying to relate that to disease or to diet. And there are some clear trends there.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about feeding omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, do you think we need to be a bit more specific, whether we're talking about short chain, long chain, total quantity, absolute intake, or do you think that the ratio of these is more important? How do you approach it?
Yeah, I think we're still learning about that, and the research that we're doing at the moment using these dry blood spot cards to collect samples from horses is giving us a lot better understanding of the outcomes you get in the horse from feeding a certain type of fatty acid, and that's the ultimate thing. In humans, they know a lot more about ratios, probably the same in pets. I don't know anything about dogs and cats. So
we're trying.
You probably do. But,
we're doing some research as well.
Yeah, so ratios. So I think it's too early to talk about ratios in the diet, but I think that in certain circumstances where you've got a lot of the 18 carbon omega-3 from, say, pasture, a pasture-based diet, you've got lots of those, you haven't got so many omega-6s, then you seem to get a decent balance of the long-chain forms. But then when you change that with using grain or oils that are high in omega-6 oils, like corn oil was always the most palatable oil people used. It was stable, and that's full of omega-6s. Soybean oil doesn't have a great omega-6 to 3 ratio. We use a lot of canola oil over here, and these are oils you feed for energy. And then there's been now a trend to use flax or linseed oil because it does have the higher omega-3 content, the 18 carbon form, but various researchers at Florida, Colorado, work we've done has shown that you can be feeding plenty of linseed oil, but that in the hope that you'll increase levels of the long-chain forms, EPA and DHA, but you don't do that. And you need fish oil, you need to feed the fish oil to get you increased levels of those fatty acids.
And so you were kind of started talking a little bit about the long chain fatty acids. And so why are you talking long chain? Maybe to the audience, what's so important about the long chain versus the short chain of these N3 fatty acids when it comes to some of the physiological benefits that we're trying to capture in the horse?
So the short chain forms are the precursors of the long chain forms. So that in oils that are full of short chain forms, we're feeding them for energy, and then there's the activity that relates to the metabolism of either the 3s or side or the 6 side. But it's the long chain form. So on the omega-3 side, you've got EPA and DHA, which are the abbreviations, and arachidonic acid or AA on the omega-6 side, which is the pro-inflammatory one. So omega-3 side tending to be anti-inflammatory, omega-6 side pro-inflammatory. And there's a whole host of prostaglandin mediators, thromboxanes, other mediators of inflammation that or inflammation resolution that flow from the production of those fatty acids. Now, where you get a direct source of the long chain omega-3s is through fish oil or marine derived oils, or sort of feeds that have high levels of those oils.
Yeah, I think more and more we're seeing algae oil pop up too.
Algae-based DHA is popping up.
I think that's becoming pretty popular. So you've touched a little bit on sort of the anti-inflammation of N3s, and that's certainly, I think, when horse owners or nutritionists see these oils or these supplements with N3s being marketed, that definitely comes up as, anti-inflammatory. But there's also a lot of claims surrounding like respiratory outcome, reproductive performance, joint health. And in your expertise and in your opinion, what areas do you think have the strongest evidence thus far for providing additional N3s to horses? And do you think there's some that are maybe overpromised or some additional gaps that we need to work through?
I think there's
that was a very loaded question.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think we've looked at human health, and a lot of long chain fatty acid, omega-3 fatty acids from marine derived oil or fish oil are used and are associated with cardiac health, inflammation, skin disease, fertility. And and a number of other areas, and respiratory disease. So in horses, I think we've probably started out with the work in fertility, in both in stallions in particular, but also in mares. And again, associations with marine-derived oils and supplementation, increasing levels in sperm, for example, or increasing levels in the female reproductive system, having anti-inflammatory effects in the uterus, and that was beneficial. They were seen to be beneficial, and that was in sort of horses and other animals. And there's even potential impacts on the sex ratio of offspring. So there's some long-term impacts there, reproduction-wise. Respiratory, yes, I think there's some good evidence about coming out of research at Purdue University in Indiana about the relationships with long-chain omega-3 fatty acids and moderate asthma, so reducing severity and allowing the horse to survive in a slightly dusty environment when often people can't reduce all of the dust, whereas reducing the dust is the biggest factor. So I think respiratory ones there. There's influences on insulin and potential role in laminitis is another one. I think there's so many reasons why you want to try and get the levels of EPA and DHA in the horse up, and the ways you're going to do it and get the ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA as low as you can. So there's lots of reasons for doing that. And there's inflammation in joints, but how I think people look at that and go, well, do I need other joint supplements? And my view is you're probably not. It's not going to be have the same impact as, say, a really high quality joint supplement, but it is contributing to maintaining joint health.
Absolutely, yeah. We can't expect drug-like results.
And it's doing so many other things. We're looking at some stuff about cardiac things. Is there a relationship between cardiac arrhythmias and low levels of sort of EPA and DHA or high AA to EPA ratios? There is gastric ulcer research that we did. So by supplementing either a long-chain omega-3 form and a long-chain omega-6 form, which gave you DGLA, that's an anti-inflammatory omega-6, led to reduced severity of gastric ulcers. So there's impacts in the stomach. Glandular gastric disease is an inflammatory disease. So I think by logic, these fatty acids would have a positive impact on that. So I think there's so many reasons for feeding them, and or for making sure the levels in the horse are right, and generally you've got to get there by feeding it. And the big myth is that, okay, if we have short-chain omega-3 fatty acids in the diet and we say on the label, it's got omega-3 fatty acids, well, every oil has, then this will lead to increases in the long-chain forms, but that's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you mentioned, well, two things actually that I want to follow up on. But the first is in regards to reproduction. So when we look at the NRC in horses, there's only a guideline for LA. But when we look across companion animals, we do have that guideline for DHA in growing animals and during gestation, lactation, because of the role that DHA plays in cognitive health and in retinal development. Do you think that's something that, and I'm not familiar if there's been the same research across horses, but do you think that's something or a specific life stage where maybe N3s in particular should have a greater focus, is during gestation and in early development of our foals?
Yes, I think that's a logical thing. Interestingly, we've just done one of our breeding farms who's interested in omega-3 fatty acids and using fish oil as a supplement to aid fertility in mares. We've collected samples from mares at foaling and foals at foaling, and we'll then follow up 60 days later, and that'll be really interesting to see. But there's certainly some work on, I think it's in other species about cognitive development. With mares prone to placentitis, I think logical reason to that's an inflammatory disease, as well as the other things you're doing. A logical reason to feed them marine-derived oils in late pregnancy. Mares prone to early embryonic loss. Again, some logical reasons too. There's work in cattle about impacts on prostaglandin levels and things like that. So I think in a reproductive sense, yes, there is certainly in the subfertile horse. And if you're wanting to get the right development in your foal, then I think absolutely. So that's one of the reasons why pasture should be the number one feed for pregnant mares. And we can do that in Australia because we've got grass available all the year. Whereas it's a bit harder in your environment.
Harder in Canada. We already have snow here. Got 6 months to go. And that's actually a really good point too, because when you look at the NRC as an example, it doesn't, apart from LA, there's really no guidelines when it comes to what the inclusion or the amount of fatty acids should be in the diet. And part of that is because there's really been no studies demonstrating deficiency, because the assumption is if you're feeding good quality forage, then that horse is meeting its requirements for these at least short chain fatty acids. But if we have a horse that maybe we have an obese horse or an overweight horse that's not receiving good quality forage, that isn't out on pasture, is that somewhere where maybe we need to look at the fatty acids in the diet a little bit more closely or monitor them for their status? I don't know. What's your opinion on that? I don't think there's a right answer, but it's something I think about.
No, the levels will be different in a horse that's fed on hay, and particularly the obese horse. I mean, obesity is a pro-inflammatory state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So counteracting, getting the best levels or the highest levels of the long chain omega-3 forms to provide some anti-inflammatory impetus is a logical thing to do. And yeah, they're not going to be on a high-fat diet, because that'll contribute to obesity anyway, further obesity.
Yeah, so it seems a bit counterintuitive, I think, to some people, right? If you're recommending N3s to an obese or overweight horse.
And there's been a couple of studies looking at insulin, the effect on insulin. And several of those. One that Joe Pagan and KR did years ago, where we were feeding, these were older horses, but they weren't particularly insulin dysregulated, and feeding them a diet that was, they were getting 30% of their energy from oil. It was probably corn oil in those days, and adding fish oil and that led to differences in glucose tolerance or glucose clearance and higher levels of insulin post-feeding. And by adding the fish oil to their diet, that increased glucose clearance and reduced levels of insulin. And there's been other studies done. Tanya Hess and Colorado and Florida have both looked at insulin sensitivity and found positive impacts of the marine-derived oil. So I think it's a part of what I would do in a laminitic feed program for a horse that's prone to laminitis. Part of what I would do.
No, I agree. It's amazing all the different roles that these cytokines have that are being produced by these long chain fatty acids. But something you had mentioned was you had discussed DGLA, which is an N6. Could you speak a little bit more to GLA? Because I know that KER has looked and done some research with GLA, and I think there might be maybe listeners that are listening to us right now might be a bit confused because we're saying like it's an anti-inflammatory fatty acid, but we're saying it's an N6. Could you speak to that a little bit? And are we sort of generalizing things too much by saying N6s are pro-inflammatory?
Yeah, we are generalizing things too much. And it's interesting that, so DGLA, which is, so you go from linoleic acid, which is the 18 carbon, to GLA, that's the next one down the chain. And then DGLA is the 20 carbon, it's the long chain form, but it's anti-inflammatory and it leads to some series 1 prostaglandins, thromboxanes, and 3 series leukotrienes. And of those, misoprostol, which is used for treatment of glandular ulcers, is a 1 series prostaglandin analog. So you're getting, so it's simplistic to say.
Very expensive drug.
Yes, it is. So it's simplistic to say 3 is anti-inflammatory and 6 is pro-inflammatory. And also arachidonic acid, which is the next one down the chain. Yes, it's generally pro-inflammatory, but for healing you need inflammation at times. And the work we did on the gastric ulcer research on the development of this product that has the GLA in it, the horses that had, there seemed to be a benefit associated. The horses with less severe gastric ulcers had higher levels of arachidonic acid in their red blood cells or in their cells than those with more severe ulcers. So there was some sort of benefit of arachidonic acid in that situation. So it's not all black and white, unfortunately, which makes the story even more complicated. Is not there in many oils, but it's the source of DGLA. And we found that by increasing the amount of GLA, then we led to increased levels of DGLA in the tissues, in the red cells of the horses, just as increasing the amount of the fish oil led to increased levels of EPA and DHA. And the thing, I've got one take-home message is that you don't get that from feeding linseed oil or flaxseed oil. You don't. You need to have the marine-derived oils, or you need to have a diet that's largely pasture-based.
And for the GLA, what's the source of GLA? What would be a common source that you would find GLA in?
Well, there's a couple of sorts. There's borage oil is one. There was a GMO safflower oil that had a source of GLA. There's a couple of others. And not very common. Okay. It's not a very common oil.
No, yeah, it's not one that you really hear about, and I think it's not one that people. I don't think that they know about it the same way that they know about EPA and DHA, because we just see it so much more often in our own diets.
Now, but again, fish oils are not all the same. So you need cold water fish oil. You can have levels can vary dramatically in fish oil. So you need to have cold water fish as the source. I guess the thing with people say fish oil, it's all great in theory, but I take fish oil capsules. But I want them in a capsule form, because if you were just sort of putting them on your food, you wouldn't you wouldn't eat it. And so getting an oil that's deodorized and is palatable is a key thing. Now, we've sort of found, you probably don't need as much as we thought in the past. So you can 30 mils for a 500 kilo horse per day will give you adequate levels in the tissues. So that seems to be good. You can get the effect with less oil. You do need to feed it for a while. You probably need levels go up after 30 days, but they'll go up more after 60 days. And I guess that's partly because the time cycle of incorporating those fatty acids into red cells. So we're using red cells, testing of red cells or just testing of whole blood as the marker for them.
No, that's, I like that I like first that you mentioned sort of what the incorporation timeline is, because I think that's often a question if you're recommending an N3 supplement to someone, or an N3 rich oil, I should say. When will I see effects, or how long does it take to accumulate in the body, I guess, is sort of the thinking behind it. And so you typically say 60 days.
I would say 60 days, yes, you need 60 days. And I guess getting back to your question about labelling, it's very easy for a product to be named 369, blah, blah, blah. But it really, very often, there's little information about what the content of that is. And it's not just the content of the short chain omega-3s. It's I think the key thing is how much of the long chain forms are there. And I think increasingly, as you said, there's sort of microalgae DHA sources are going to become more useful in the future. Now, they're less available probably at the moment, but there's less work on them, but there's some good work showing their benefits. But yeah, it's really, you need fish oil to have the impact on the long chain forms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that with the algae, it's the conversation about sustainability. And then I think there's some assumption that maybe they will be more accepted by horses or horse owners because they seem sort of more in line with the quote unquote natural diet of the horse, but being almost like a plant-based. So I think that's why.
I guess there are skeptics who say, well, I don't see horses eating fish very often. It's not a natural diet. But we've moved them so much away from the natural diet. The natural diet was grass, and we weren't locking them in stables or asking them to work every day. And so we've moved them away. We've put them on a diet of grain, which changes it, reduces the intakes of the 18 carbon omega-3s. And we're often feeding very high fat diets now. And that's the other thing. So we're feeding a lot more oil than the standard diet would give. And most of those oils higher in omega-6 fatty acids than omega-3. So you can't really putting the fish oil in feed. It's nice to have the oil in feed. I mean, one of my sort of principles is to keep it simple and feed less supplements. Keep feeding simple, but it's difficult to put this in feed because of stability and palatability. You can do it if it's being used, if it was being mixed in feed and used within a week, but beyond that, it gets difficult.
So I'm glad you brought up sustainability or stability, shelf life and stability, because that's something I do want to touch on. You had mentioned quality, and so I always wonder with feeding horses, often people will get a jug of oil, maybe sometimes a big jug because it's more cost effective, and they'll put it in their barn, and that barn isn't always temperature controlled, right? It's here in Canada, we go through -30 winters, we go through almost +40 summers. And so do you think we need to have more conversations and kind of pay more attention regarding oxidation and shelf life when it comes to these N3 rich oils, and educating owners in terms of how they should be stored and what they should look for in terms of oxidation?
Yeah, I think that's a key thing with all oils. Certainly interestingly, there was something, I was reading something yesterday, and there was one study looking at markers of oxidation, and they were not. The hypothesis was that a fish oil-based diet would lead to more markers of oxidation, and it actually didn't, which was interesting. So, in fact, one of the other interesting things in that study was they looked at levels of vitamin E in the blood went up dramatically when feeding fish oil.
Oh, interesting. Because usually the recommendation is you increase your vitamin E, right, as you're increasing your...
Generally, there's a recommendation to increase the vitamin E to protect against oxidative stress. But in this particular study, the levels, was a Journal of Animal Science, was some good work. It was, levels went up. If I look it up, who did it? Where is it? It was, no, I can't find it now.
Yeah, we recently just did one in sled dogs where it was like a dosing study, and we noticed that with the high EPA DHA, but we challenged the upper limit of the NRC in dogs, that they did have a lower vitamin E. But the conversation that we had with the student was like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like that means that, the vitamin E is it's helping, right? It's doing its job potentially if you have lower levels. It doesn't mean that the animal is quote unquote deficient in vitamin E.
If it's doing its job as an antioxidant. I think that's another interesting topic is the vitamin E. What is deficient, what is optimal, and what sources. It's another one of these is what sources do you need to increase levels of vitamin E? Because a bit like the omega-3 oils, there's omega-3 oils, and then there's effective omega-3 oils, and there's synthetic vitamin E, and there's natural vitamin E, and there's forms of natural vitamin E that are much more effective at increasing levels in blood and in tissues. So it's and there is the ability to measure vitamin E levels in horses. In the US, now we don't, or North America. Unfortunately, I can't find anywhere in Australia that'll do that at the moment. But at least with these dry blood spot cards and that we're working with, there'll be the ability to measure individual horses' levels of all fatty acids, and then I think we're 36 or something like that. And the key ones you're looking at. So it's just they do it in humans as well, and it's the same lab. So it seems to be a cost-effective analysis method, stable storage after collection, and you get individual horse reports, and that will, I think, provide the ability to tailor diets to the individual horse, because you can have horses on a very similar diet and quite different levels within the body. So, and maybe that reflects, workloads and their general propensities to inflammation and various metabolic differences. So that was where we've done some recent work showing that this was mainly in race horses we've done, where we're looking at feeding different oil sources and marked differences in the levels of the long-chain omega-3s. To get them up, you need the fish oil. You can't do it off linseed or flaxseed oil. Whereas you would have assumed, the assumption would have been that, yes, you could, because they would be metabolized. The short-chain omega-3s would be metabolized, and they're not.
Yeah, you think the horse as a herbivore who's consuming mostly, plant sources that have the short chain should be able to efficiently convert to the long chain, would kind of be the logical chain of thinking.
But I think what's happening is that the omega-6 side overwhelms it. The intakes of omega-6 fatty acids, say, that you get from grain overwhelm with that competition for the enzyme. They sort of overwhelm the transformation. If you don't have it, so if you've got it there if you've got a grass-based diet, it's a different story.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do think, to your point about when we kind of talked about the fish oil and quote unquote being natural, we have changed so much about how we manage and we feed horses as compared to how they've historically lived and fed and eaten, right? That it's so different.
You're never going to feed fish oil as a source of energy. You don't need to. I mean, it would be, it's obviously is a source of energy. It keeps polar bears alive in winter, but it's in the horse. You're feeding a small amount, and maybe it's okay. You've got depending on the circumstances and the need for fat in the diet as a source of energy. Then we're going to use different oils for that. And we use a lot of canola oil, US corn, soy oil, or rice bran oil, but fish oil, to a small amount of fish oil, not as an energy source, but as a source of the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, I think makes a lot of sense for many horses.
It's time for our famous three.
No, I agree with you. And I feel like I could keep asking you questions about fatty acids because I love the topic so much. But I think that's probably a perfect place for me to stop berating you with my questions. I really appreciate you joining us today. I thought it was a very clear and insightful and practical discussion of an otherwise complex topic. And I think everyone listening will feel the same way. But before I let you go, I always end these episodes by asking our guests a couple questions just to get to know them a little bit better. So my first question, I will start by asking you, what's one equine nutrition myth you would love to see disappear?
I'd love to have people not rely on Dr. Google as much and on forums.
I think that goes
seek sources of information from people that are qualified and not unqualified people.
Yes, yeah, no influencers on social media.
The internet's is a great thing, but it's dangerous, and so I think that keep it simple. Keep it simple would be
I agree. Horses are complicated enough as is, right? You don't need to make it more complicated.
We complicate it too much. I think that would be the general, and the myth that the more supplements I feed, or if I feed 2 scoops of this supplement, it will do better than 1 scoop. That myth. It's about feeding your horse a balanced diet and doing it simply, keeping forage as the number one component, and then topping up with the nutrients that aren't in forage as required, depending on the circumstances.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you absolutely. You sort of already led into our next question. I always ask what a favorite book or resource is related to equine nutrition. But as I mentioned in the start, you have written a book on equine nutrition. And I think the second edition just came out this year. Is that correct?
No, that was a while ago. That was a sort of general horse care book. I have co-authored a book on equine nutrition which I just got yesterday, I don't know if you can see it, called Feeding Horses, Evidence-Based Approach to Equine Nutrition. And it's with a Turkish veterinarian who's in the Netherlands called Gülsar Karasu. And it's, a couple 100 pages long, 160 pages long.
For a textbook.
Yeah, quite a lot of references. We try to reference stuff, so it's meant to be evidence-based, science-based, and chapters about understanding 4 chapters, understanding equine. What are we here? And there's a digital version of it as well. Understanding digestion, feed sources for horses, nutrition-related health disorders, and formulating rations. They're the sort of chapters there.
Oh, perfect. Sounds very comprehensive.
It's for that size. If you want the best source, you mentioned the NRC. The NRC is a great source of information. KER research was cited a number of times in there, and Joe Pagan made a massive contribution to it. So that's 2007, and that was a sort of consensus statement. I think Pat Harris, you mentioned earlier, who's a guru of equine nutrition like me. She's a veterinarian who's crossed into the space. So the PhD people might be going, oh, they don't know enough. But
everyone loves Pat Harris. You can't not love her.
Yeah, Pat's book, Equine Clinical Nutrition, that she wrote with Ray Gore, who's another veterinarian, but incredibly knowledgeable, Antipodean, New Zealander, and Manfred Koenen, German. So he's that's a really good book, but that's a sort of encyclopedia style book.
And if anyone wanted to buy your book, is it just sort of available where you buy books typically, I guess, online? Or
it's probably on Amazon. I'm not doing a very good job of promoting it. It'll be on, I'm sure if you search it, even though I'm telling them not to Google things about how to feed their horses, but they can Google
only Google books. Yeah, Googling a book is different.
Yeah, it's available online. Amazon certainly have it. So, that would be and that just came out last year or this year, maybe early this year. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to retire on it, but And yeah.
Have to write some more books for that.
Yes, writing books, the best part of writing the book is finishing them, because then you don't have to do it.
Like most things, yeah. And then my last question for you before we let you leave is, if you could own any horse, real or fictional, alive or deceased, who would it be and why?
Well, I tell you, this is a novel one. You gave me some warning on this. So there's a book written by an Australian author called Geraldine Brooks called Horse, which came out in 2022. And it was a sort of multiple timeline thin narrative exploring some of the life and the times of that life of a thoroughbred racehorse and stallion called Lexington, and linking that with slavery, art, and challenges of living at that time. But won multiple literary prizes. One of my favourite books. So I'll say Lexington, the horse, as the hero of that book. And Geraldine Brooks is a great author. She's written many other really good books. Not just because she's Australian, I'm saying that, but
that's okay.
It won she's won the Pulitzer Prize. With March, which was another Civil War era slavery related book. So yeah.
It's good. We're getting a lot of book recommendations today. I like that.
Yeah. Okay. We'll give a plug for her. I'm sure she doesn't need the plug, but it's a great book. And so the horse at the hero of that. I've got with racehorses, I probably deal with thoroughbred racehorses a fair bit, and so I've got on the wall behind me, you can't quite see, there's a print of Farlap, who's on that wall. The wall on that side, Farlap, and in my office in another area, I've got one of Secretariat. Farlap was a New Zealand-bred horse, Australian champion in the Depression era, went to America, raced, and then died over there, probably of accidental arsenic toxicity, actually. The things that were used in those days for tonics. And I've got Secretariat, who's an inspiring horse, and a lovely horse too.
Yes, yeah, everyone knows Secretariat. Even non-horse people, I think, are familiar with Secretariat.
Yeah, I think everybody knows Secretariat, and he was a nice horse. He was a nice horse as well. So, yeah,
lots of good choices.
Got to go to Claiborne Farm in Lexington in the late 80s, and they had Secretariat and Mr. Prospector, Danzig, and Nijinsky, and some other famous horses there. It's, just what a collection for those people who are...
Yeah, lots of famous horses out of Kentucky.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's the Mecca, Lexington. So, and Lexington, the name of my, if you could have one horse. So there you are. That's the connection there.
Perfect. Full circle. It all came together in the end. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Huntington. This has been such a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you again for being here today and for sharing your time and your expertise. It's always a pleasure having experts like yourself on the podcast and learning from them. So I know our listeners will take a lot from the discussion today, and I really appreciate the depth that you brought with your answers today as well.
Yeah, it's been interesting to be here. I mean, this is a complicated topic. Joe Pagan knows the whole thing a whole lot better than I do, and it's difficult to explain. We have a Equinews, a sort of educational section on our website called Equinews, which is a great resource, and Mark Llewellyn, who writes those articles, does a good job of trying to take sort of complicated science and make it readable. So if people want to look for extra sources of information, go to Equinews, and you can search all sorts of topics, not just omega-3 fatty acids. So that might be a good follow-up for if I've confused people.
Yeah, I think we'll just have to have you back as another option too. You'll have to come back, and we'll have to talk maybe a more specific topic. Maybe we'll do like exercise and fatty acids or something next time.
Good. Happy to do that.
Great. That sounds perfect. I think that would be a good follow-up.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone listening. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Pet Food Science podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe for more discussions on equine and companion animal nutrition. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.